Mudsupper. Cat carried the limp Mudsupper to the kitchen and offered it to old Grandel. Grandel inspected the fish with the same air of disgust that she usually reserved for Cat herself. Finally, she said, "Right then, 50 penny off your board." She dropped the fish on the counter, materialized a cleaver from somewhere, and began cleaning it with swift, rough slices and scrapes. Cat knew 50 penny wasn't much, but she also knew not to try and barter for more. Back talk to old Grandel would earn her nothing but a swap. Back in the common room, Cat looked for Brieg at their usual spot at the long table near the stairs, but he wasn't there. Instead, he had taken a seat much closer to the fireplace. Cat approached apprehensively. The tables by the fireplace were the loudest and rowdiest part of the room. She didn't know why Brieg wanted to sit there. She knew it meant he wouldn't be scolding her now. He would not do that in front of everyone. But it also meant she wouldn't be able to say anything either. In their usual corner by the stairs, it was okay for her to whisper to him, but the fireplace was a place for grown-up conversation, and she would be getting them both in trouble if she tried to speak up. Cat sat on the bench next to her brother, positioning him between herself and the fireplace, and tried to make herself look small and inconspicuous. The meal had not started yet. There was just bread on the table, and the talk around the fire was not loud yet. For a while, Cat nibbled on a piece of salt bread and watched Brieg. He was drumming his fingers on the table. His hands were so much bigger than hers. She looked at her own hands. They looked so much different than his. His hands looked like unclenched hammers. He was a big, dark mountain with a friendly, soft face, and she was a little red sprout trying to grow in shadow, waiting to jump out into the sun. More people were coming into the common room. There were a few familiar faces, but most of the customers at the By-the-Day were here for a night or two, and then gone forever. The kitchen hands began bringing out the food. Brieg helped Cat get a plate full of kelp greens and a bowl of fish stew. Cat stirred the hot soup with her spoon, occasionally dipping out spindly fish bones, and wondering whether or not a piece of her Mudsupper was in there. Cat was good at recognizing different kinds of fish when they were alive and whole, but chopped up in a stew, most of them looked more or less the same to her. Some raucous sea hunters came in, smelling of brine and blood. They took up the remaining benches near the fire, calling for food. They were bragging about the day's kill. Flare squids and a tusked shark. Cat watched Brieg as he watched them. He had a serious look on his face, and Cat wondered if he was scared of the monsters that the sea hunters were describing. One of the hunters was standing up on the bench with one big boot on the table, pantomiming how she had freed her spear for the death strike. Cat tried to imagine what a flare squid would look like alive in the water. She had only ever seen them strung up to dry in the sun. She had no idea how they moved, or even which end of them was the front and which was the back. She chewed a chunk of fish. The soup was good. After a while, the talk turned to the king. Cat already knew that the king had died a week ago, at some place people called the Frontier. And she stopped paying attention. It had been the main topic of conversation for days, and she was tired of it. She focused on cutting the stringy parts of her sea greens into the smallest pieces possible. She didn't like them, but she knew she should eat them. Reducing them to a minced mush made it easier to swallow them quickly without a lot of chewing and tasting. The only time the conversation caught her attention is when everyone would laugh at something they thought was funny. Most of the table roared at the suggestion that the king's trousers had never been found, though she had missed hearing what that was supposed to mean. Cat glanced at Brieg's face to see if he was laughing. He was smiling a little, but still seemed serious, or sad. Cat wasn't sure. It was against the law to insult the king, so pirates tried to insult him as much as possible. Even though, as far as Cat could tell, everybody had liked the king pretty well, especially the pirates. Cat finished mangling her greens, heaped them carefully, and then wolfed them all down quick, and followed them with more bread and water to wash away the flavor. With her plate and bowl empty and her stomach full, Cat had nothing left to distract her. She rested her chin on her hands and listened. "You're wrong. Nothing will change," insisted a person with a picture of a skull tattoo on their forehead. "She's not going to break the truce. It's what makes Shrappa prosper." "That's an oversimplification, and you're the one who's wrong," said one of the regulars, an elderly person Cat recognized, who usually arrived to the dining hall slightly drunk and slowly sobered up over dinner. "Longbeard will call all the shots anyway. Once she's queen, she went to their temple school." "That doesn't mean anything, you imbecile. Captains and merchants and knights come out of the temple schools. It doesn't mean the god directs the ship or reaps the profits or swings the swords." "Come on, the god of pirates, and you don't think she'll uphold the truce?" "I didn't say she would break it. I said it would change. Besides, if she really were to put the force of the crown under Longbeard, that would be even worse. The truce works because Srappa is neutral ground." "My mom went to the Unesche Temple School," cut in one of the kitchen hands. "She never favored the drowned, not that I ever saw." Pause. "That's my point. When she's queen, Longbeard won't hold any sway. The temple school just means she'll have learned a thing or two." "That's not what you said before. You said it would all change." "No, I didn't." "How do temple schools work?" Briggs suddenly interrupted. The debaters stared at him. Cat stared too. She was surprised to hear him speak up. I thought only nobles' kids could go to those," Briggs continued, and addressing the kitchen hand, he added, "I've met your mum. She's no princess." "Ha, you take that back, Zago," cried the kitchen hand, slapping Briggs on the shoulder, but showing a face that Cat thought looked pleased instead of angry. "They take all kinds," said the older debater. "They do lotteries and scholarships. That way a noble can learn alongside a commoner, and they both gain greater experience." "Oh, and you really think just because she might have learned reading and writing alongside some farmer's boy, she'll wreck everything?" "I didn't say that." "Longbeard will have the ear of the crown. That crown has power, and that is good for pirates. And what's good for pirates is good for us. It's good for all of us." "Is the crown that powerful, though?" asked the sea hunter with the big boots. "It didn't help save the king from that gin arrow." "That's 'cause he left the crown with his trousers," said someone else. Some people laughed. Cat had only followed a bit of what the grown-ups were talking about. She liked watching people's faces while they talked, but it was more or less the same kind of stuff they always argued or laughed about. It had been a long day, and Cat felt tired. She was afraid that the voices were going to lull her to sleep, and she wouldn't get a chance to talk to Briggs about the trouble she'd gotten into. Cat grabbed a piece of soft brown bread and began to pinch off bits and squish them down into balls with her fingers. She needed something to do with her hands to keep herself awake. She knew they wouldn't be going upstairs until Briggs was tired of listening. He was asking more questions, too, which was odd, but she ignored that strangeness. She would make a pile of bread pearls and pretend her plate was an oyster.